Returning to the dating hunting grounds after divorce is pure hell. I mean, I never thought I'd have to do this again. After I got married, all those worries about what I looked like, whether she liked me, whether I should kiss her, or how far I could go, just disappeared. In the end, she said yes. I put the ring on her finger. We kissed, and we had our happiness. At that moment, I was sure that she liked me, and I could kiss her and go all the way with her almost anywhere, and it didn't matter what I looked like. Looking back, I think that may have been part of our problem. After betrayal, lies, exposure, quarrels, tears, and moving, I suddenly found myself an independent, middle-aged guy. At first, I didn't mind too much. I knew I didn't want to risk going through the whole divorce thing anymore, and I enjoyed spending my time the way I wanted without worrying about anyone else. Why is this proximity needed? Then a few months turned into a few years, and I found myself wanting a relationship again. Sure, I missed sex, but I also missed intimacy, having someone to talk to and something to do. I realized that I didn't want to come home after work to an empty apartment all my life. But how the hell do you get back to dating? After years of not having to worry about such things, it has become incredibly difficult to simply meet someone to ask out. I tried a couple of dating sites, but they just made me feel ridiculous. I knew that I had much more confidence in myself and my abilities now than I ever had in my teens and 20s, so why did I feel so lost? After months of frustration and failure that brought nothing more than a few awkward failed encounters, I finally saw the light. I haven't gotten anywhere by trying to meet strangers, so why not date someone I already know? I decided to ask out a woman I had known for a long time. Charlotte was a primary school teacher. We were the same age and had both gone through a difficult divorce. We had college-age children, and we would occasionally email or meet for coffee to talk about our kids. Maybe it's time to talk about us. When I suggested this, she was, to put it mildly, doubtful. We corresponded by email for some time, discussing the pros and cons. It was a frank conversation, and neither of us tried to talk each other out of anything. The divorce was just as devastating for her as it was for me, and she didn't want to hurt herself again. At the same time, she admitted that she also misses intimacy and does not want to spend the rest of her life alone. I didn't know it at the time, but she also tried dating for a while and didn't find anything remotely satisfying about it. When she finally agreed to go on a date with me, she set several conditions. The dates will be one-offs, and at the end of each, we will honestly decide whether we should date again. No waiting by the phone for one or the other to call. She also wanted us to spend at least a couple of dates, fully clearing things up with our exes before moving on. This may seem strange to you, but I understood perfectly well what she was getting at, so I agreed. On our first date, we met on a Sunday morning for coffee and bagels at a very popular place. She suggested we focus on talking about what we like about our exes and why we fell in love with them. In the end, we had a great time. It was surprisingly easy to talk about all the things I liked about my ex, what attracted me to her, and why I fell in love with her. I enjoyed hearing her talk about her ex in that same vein. She let her guard down, remembering those good times, and seemed happier and more relaxed. At the end of the date, we both agreed that we had fun and would like to do it again. Our second date wasn't nearly as fun, but it was just as necessary. We agreed that we would spend it talking about what we hated, or at least what bothered us most, about our exes. For this meeting, we chose a loud and hectic Italian place in the city center with a reputation for excellent food. It was a late dinner, and the noise of the drinking crowd seemed to create a protective shell around our booth. We both felt that we could speak without being overheard. It's not so bad to listen to your date talk about how terrible her ex was, is it? Although it required a lot of self-control, there were times when I agreed with what she was saying, and sometimes I didn't. But I had to keep telling myself that it wasn't my place to take sides or comment at all. It was more like I was actively listening to her and trying to understand what she was feeling. Then, it was my turn to talk about my ex, and this conversation could get pretty dark. It was easy to talk about how much I loved her and what attracted me to her, but I didn't want to relive everything that had ruined our relationship and turned me into one of those dads who only sees his kids once a weekend. However, I knew I had to do it. If I don't do this, things won't go any further. I think the point is that we were honest with each other. We were honest about not only our ex's shortcomings, but also our own, and I think we got a sense of how much each of us has grown. At the end of the evening, we agreed that there should be a third date. We chose an upscale steakhouse for this meeting. We went there on a Tuesday evening so it wouldn't be too crowded, and when I made the reservation, I told the manager that it was a special occasion and we really wanted some privacy. When we arrived, it turned out that we were the only customers who were seated in a small dining room off to the side, while all the other customers were seated in the main room. Perfect. We got down to business as soon as we were seated and served our drinks, a Manhattan for me and a Chardonnay for her. I knew this would happen, but I was still shocked when she asked, "So, tell me why you cheated." Yes, that was the topic set for today's date, and obviously I was going to speak first. We both expected honesty from each other, and I knew that today's date would likely determine whether others would. So I took the glass, looked her in the eyes, and answered. Our kids were young and we had money problems. I was stuck in a dead-end job that didn't pay a damn. To be honest, I didn't show much initiative, but I was young and didn't know what I wanted out of life. I didn't know how to find another job or even what other job I wanted. When a new position opened up in another department of my company, I offered myself. During the interview, I was told that it would be a promotion and that it would come with a salary increase. We were so excited that everything seemed to be finally coming together good for me, and the prospect of more money came up. We immediately started planning what we could do with the extra money. But when I got the job, the CEO intervened and said that she considered this a lateral move, not a promotion, and there would be no increase. We were devastated. I loved the new job, but other than that, everything we had planned just evaporated. It was the end of the year, so we were still weighed down by the holidays. We became quiet, distant from each other. We didn't communicate and the sex just stopped. For about 4 months until the new year, we almost stopped being a couple and started acting like housemates. I paused to have another drink. I needed a drink, and the whiskey tasted great. She listened carefully, and when I took a sip, she took her first sip of wine. I wasn't sure if she liked the drink because her expression didn't change at all. She had incredibly attractive, warm brown eyes and knew how to apply eyeshadow and eyeliner to highlight them. Her brown hair was medium length and was cut to highlight her face. She was short, a little plump, and when she smiled, amazing dimples appeared on her cheeks. But now she wasn't smiling. She carefully kept a neutral expression on her face, and as soon as she put down her glass, she said, "So you want to say that it's not your fault that you cheated?" "No, not at all," I replied. "I take full responsibility. It was a difficult situation for both of us, but that's no excuse for what I did." "Okay," she said, nodding. "So, who was she?" "Her name was Patrice. She was married. She had 2 boys." "How did you meet her?" "On a dating site," I answered, feeling some shame. When she raised her eyebrows, I continued, No one introduced us, and it was not an accident that just happened. I made the announcement myself. "You yourself were looking for meetings," she said affirmatively. I took another sip from my glass. It was harder than I thought. "Yes," I replied, though I never actually thought I'd meet anyone. At least that's how I justified it to myself at the time. I mean, I was sure that everything that I'm getting from a personal ad is a scam. In fact, the ad had been up for 3 or 4 weeks with no results when she responded. To be honest, I almost forgot I posted it. She looked at me with outright disbelief, and I quickly continued. "No, really, I got exactly what I expected. Women who assured me that they were in the same boat as me, and if I just registered on this or that site, I could see their scandalous photos. Women who told me that they would be happy to date me if only I would help them with some expenses. Women who promised to send me photographs of themselves and to meet with me if only I would send them photographs of my wife and daughters." This shook her slightly. She choked. Shock showed on her face. "No," I said. I didn't even consider it. I just blocked them, but it quickly got boring. I, of course, understood that I myself was not an angel, but I was simply shocked by how many real perverts there were. And what did this Patrice say that got you interested? Hi, I read your ad and I think we have something to talk about. Is it true? She asked. And that's all? Yes, I answered. At first I thought she was just another scammer. I sent a quick, polite response thanking her for responding to my ad and asking her to tell me more about herself. She responded within an hour, telling me about her situation, husband, kids, and how unhappy she was in her marriage. She didn't want to get a divorce herself or hurt my marriage, but she needed something else. Charlotte gave me a contemptuous, cynical smile. What? I asked. She wanted to get everything at once, she answered. Perhaps, I replied, surprised that even now I still felt that I had to protect Patrice. But honestly, I felt the same way. I mean, I didn't want to end my marriage or hurt anyone, but... What? She asked, when my pause dragged on. Well, like I said, we were going through some tough times at home. I wanted someone that I could enjoy without worrying about finances and kids and all the burdens that come with marriage. But at the same time, I didn't want to ruin my life or anyone else's. I never, ever wanted to hurt anyone. Apparently, I continued, slowly thinking about the situation. In fact, I again wanted those feelings when a new relationship begins. You know, you get to know them, and they get to know you, and everything is simple and fun. But I definitely wasn't looking for a replacement for his wife. Okay, I think I understand, Charlotte said quietly, looking down at her drink again. After a moment, she asked what happened next. Weeks of email correspondence, I said. She was clearly surprised by this, so I nodded and continued. We were so paranoid about being found out that we never contacted each other from home. But at work, we texted like crazy. Of course, we used our phones because none of us wanted our employers to find out about what was happening. It was like this: an hour of work, checking the phone, quickly reading the letter, then sending a response. The work took a lot of time, didn't it? She asked. In fact, my productivity skyrocketed. I tried to quickly finish the next piece of work so that I could check the mail again, and it was always so exciting to open the mailbox and find a new letter there. But didn't you want to meet? She asked. Not right away, I said, shaking my head. We weren't really in a rush to get into a physical relationship. We each wanted something special in our lives, and we really found that in our email correspondence. I guess you could call it psychological cheating. We talked about everything, about likes and dislikes, about family, about growing up, about dreams and disappointments. At some point, we exchanged phone numbers so that we could correspond on social networks instead of email. I assume you were also talking about your spouses? She asked, looking down again and taking another sip of wine. Yes, I answered slowly. This had to be done delicately. I mean, we were talking about our spouses, talking about what happened that day, like, she said this or we did this and he did that and stuff like that. She looked at me without saying anything. The silence lasted a few seconds, so I sighed and continued. Look, of course, we were both unhappy in our marriages, so naturally we talked about the reasons and we talked about our spouses, but it wasn't bitch gossip. We didn't badmouth them. More like, we needed a sympathetic listener, and it wasn't all the time. Okay, she said, softening. So you liked correspondence so much that you didn't even want to meet right away. That's right, I said. We didn't even send each other photographs except portrait ones. I recognized her. She recognized me. Each of us had a little secret in life that made everything more exciting, and we could still convince ourselves not to harm our spouses. Obviously, you did have physical contact, she said. It was a statement, not a question. Yes, I answered, nodding slowly. We never deluded ourselves that it wouldn't happen, but we took our time, which allowed us to really fall in love with each other, I think, before we decided to do it. The waitress came to take our orders, and we were forced to take a break. We also ordered another drink and waited for them to arrive before starting again. On time, I commented when we were finally alone again. Charlotte laughed and took a sip, then quickly returned with a question. So you fell in love with each other? She raised her eyebrows and I paused, considering my answer and taking a slow sip of my drink to buy time. Yes, in a sense, I finally answered. At least that's what we told each other. But we also never forgot that this was not a real relationship. It was a fantasy. Like I said, we never had to quarrel about children, relatives, money, or anything. There were no external stressors. We could just focus on making each other happy in a way that our spouses couldn't. We paused for a few minutes to eat some croutons brought to us, which we dipped in olive oil. We took a few more sips of our drinks. Neither of us worried about drinking too much. We knew that this conversation would require courage, so we each arrived at the restaurant by taxi. So, obviously, you ended up meeting face to face. Tell me about your first meeting, she finally said, her face carefully neutral. I shrugged and said, You better not hear about our first meeting. No? She asked, raising her eyebrows in surprise. Why not? It was a quick, slightly awkward public dinner. I was working in Lakeland at the time. She was working at the university, and we met downtown. We were both nervous, not so much about the meeting, but about being seen together, and we had little time. We chatted, broke the ice, and after half an hour or so, we went our separate ways. What you really should hear about is the second meeting. I finished, trying my best not to grin. Okay, so be it, she said, quickly drinking another glass, perhaps for courage. I took another sip and then began. It was the next day, a cold day at the end of winter when the snow and ice had not yet melted. I texted her that I had to see her. I was going to tell my boss that I wasn't feeling well and leave work a couple of hours early. I'll be in Lake Park if she wants to meet me. After a few seconds, she replied that she would be there. We agreed to meet in the coastal area. It seemed that in winter there were the least people there. As it turned out, we were right. The parking lot and walking paths were not even cleared, and everything was covered with a layer of frozen snow. When I arrived, her minivan was already in the parking lot. I parked next to her, and I remember we both looked at each other for a few seconds before getting out of the car. It's hard to describe everything I felt. I was excited, nervous. I felt like a teenager on a first date. I remember being incredibly paranoid, looking around as if someone I knew might suddenly drive up to any moment. I also thought that this was the last chance to cancel everything. I knew that if we left, there would be no turning back. Anyway, it probably only lasted a few seconds, and then she opened her door and walked out. I did the same. I remember we greeted each other, and I could see that she was just as excited as I was, but we were both still aware that this was a public place. We started walking and talking, mostly about how it's great that we're finally alone. But we didn't touch each other. We didn't hold hands or anything. I think we were both afraid that there might be security cameras or something. Now, it's funny how paranoid we were, but we were determined never to get caught. Anyway, when the path went down under the bridge, I just looked at her, and suddenly we were in each other's arms, kissing. How was it? She asked, seeming genuinely interested. Great, I admitted, shrugging slightly. Did I mention that she was tall, almost as tall as me? That was unusual for me. Besides, we had been sharing all sorts of details about our lives with each other for about a month, so it was incredibly exciting to finally be alone and kiss her. My heart must have been beating 1,000 beats a minute. I couldn't believe how exciting it was just to touch her lips with my lips. It turned out to be one of those times where you break the kiss, walk a couple of meters, and then grab each other and kiss again. We were both excited, but we took our time, making each kiss something special and just enjoying each other. After a moment, I realized that I had withdrawn into myself. I shook my head and quickly looked back at Charlotte. She just sat and looked at me with a flat, emotionless expression on her face. She was not pleased, but nodded, indicating that I should continue. So, I continued hastily, after a few minutes of kissing, we both realized that we were freezing. She also mentioned that she couldn't stay long. Lake Park is north of the university, and she lived south of the city, so today it will take her longer to get home than usual. Neither of us wanted our little date to end when we walked back to the cars and she asked me to get into her van. I did so, and once the doors were closed and the heater was on, We continued. Kisses, hugs, and all that. When it got warmer in the car, she took off her coat. She was wearing a fairly thin button-down blouse. I was surprised because it was more of a summer outfit, but she claimed it was hot in her office at the university. "So you wasted no time in taking advantage of the situation?" Charlotte asked, swirling the wine in her glass and taking another sip. "And don't be modest," she added. "Tell me all the details." "Okay," I sighed. We started kissing again, and I immediately reached for her breasts. They were small, size A, but I felt them responding to my touch. As I continued to kiss, I started massaging them. This seemed to excite her, and I became a little bolder. She started to really respond, and very soon we were doing it hot and hard. After a few minutes, I started undoing the buttons on her blouse. I didn't know if I'd gone too far. We were in a public parking lot after all, although it was deserted, but I figured she'd stop me if it wouldn't be comfortable. Instead, she just leaned back and stuck out her chest. As soon as her blouse opened, I even pulled it out of her trousers to unbutton it completely. I saw that she had a regular bra that fastened in the back. It didn't matter to me. I just pushed it up to gain access. At this point, we had to take a break again as the salads arrived. We ate in silence for a while until Charlotte finally looked up at me. "And what happened?" she asked. She asked to stop. She said if we continued, we'd have to go all the way, and she didn't want to have sex right there in her minivan in a public parking lot. If anyone had approached, we could have gotten into big trouble. It was hard for me, no joke, to stop. But she understood. Besides, it was starting to get dark and we both needed to get home. "Poor thing," Charlotte purred in feigned concern. "Your girlfriend left you upset. And then what?" "Then I watched her get ready," I said with a shrug, kissed her one last time, got out and walked to my car. Then I watched her drive away while I started the car and warmed it up. I was so sad to see her go, but at the same time, I was happy that everything worked out. We were both so excited that I knew sex would happen, and very soon. Then I returned home and tried to be the best husband and father I could be. I was afraid that my wife would somehow find out about this right away, but Patrice did not wear perfume or lipstick. She rarely wears it at all, so that there were no traces. She even checked me for hair before I got out of her van. I remember dinner, putting the kids to bed and trying to start a conversation with my wife. I stopped and looked at her for a moment. She never guessed. Charlotte just sat there for a few moments, staring at her empty salad bowl, and then the waitress came to take the bowls and tell us that our dishes would be arriving. "Did you feel guilty when you returned home or maybe the next day?" To be honest, I didn't know what to answer. When I paused for a long time, she looked up at me. We promised to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But on the other hand, I didn't want her to hate me. "No," I finally said with a sigh. "I mean, not yet. Later, when Patrice and I had sex, I think the guilt was just wearing me down. It was like it was eating away at me. But at that point, we hadn't had sex yet, so maybe for me it mattered. Anyway, all I could think about was seeing her again and, moving on." She nodded and then said, "And I bet it didn't take long to go further, did it?" "No," I admitted. To be honest, I texted her the very next day asking if we'd see each other again, but she said we only had as much time as we could take away from work. However, we set up a date. A hotel date? For next week. How often did you see her in general?" Charlotte interrupted. "We met for lunch once a week, and a date at the hotel was once a month or a month and a half," I answered. "And how long have you been together?" she asked, leaning forward slightly. This time I actually had to think, just for a second or two, counting the months in my head. 14, maybe 16 months, I finally answered. "So, tell me about a typical hotel date without leaving anything out," she said, the seriousness in her voice again. "Well, okay, we've arrived. It was always a weekday, and it always started like any other day. Alarm clock, shower, getting dressed for work, getting the kids ready, making lunches, etc. I was always the last one out of the house, so it was easy for me to make a phone call when everyone was leaving for work. After that, I went to the airport hotel and rented a room. Instead of interrupting this time, she raised her hand. I stopped and nodded. Why is the hotel at the airport? And how the hell did they allow you to check in so early? And doesn't paying for a room leave a paper trail? She purred. Good questions. I nodded. The airport hotel is never crowded, unless there is a major weather problem where a lot of flights are canceled. We knew there would always be rooms available, and there was a chance that someone would see us driving in or out of the parking lot. Was much smaller. The only people passing by were those who were on their way to a flight or had just landed, and we knew when family and friends were flying. As for the paper trail, I did have to give them my credit card to book the room, but I always paid in cash, and we changed the room to Patrice when she arrived. She was responsible for the family finances, so if the card was charged some random expenses, and in fact they never happened, she could hide them from her husband. Okay, smart, she admitted. You've got it all planned out like Danny Ocean, haven't you? Keep going. Patrice's day started later than mine, so I had time to check in, get up and check out the room, and then head out to the old mall parking lot. I parked in the back lot, and no one driving by would have seen the car, but at the same time, she would be safe for the whole day. Like me, she would call work to call in sick as soon as her husband and children left home, and then join me. She would park next to me, lock the car, get into mine, and we would drive to the hotel. For additional security, I drove onto the service road, parked in the hotel courtyard. We walked through the service entrance, climbed the back stairs, and immediately got into the room. Oh, I added, remembering, I always asked for a room away from other guests, if possible. I said that I was on a business trip flying out at night, and I really needed to get some sleep before going to a meeting. It's amazing, that's all she said. I can't even believe how you thought of everything. Well, we really didn't want to get caught, I repeated. Okay, she said, taking another drink when our food arrived. Once everything was ready and we were alone again, she nodded and finished her sentence. Tell me all the details. As soon as we were inside, we closed the door and the curtains. The whole world seemed to disappear, and it was just us. We started with kisses, always with kisses, but while we were kissing, I led her to the bed and took off her clothes. She always had some little surprise for me, like a special pair of panties that she bought just for us, ones that her husband had never seen, or she would sunbathe in the tanning salon with a little bunny sticker on her thigh. She still had the Playboy logo on. Another time she painted her nipples and labia, stuff like that. Charlotte nodded, obviously fully listening to my words, so I continued. Within a couple of minutes, she was already naked, lying on the bed. Were you still dressed? Charlotte interrupted, clearly trying to get an accurate picture of the situation. Yes. I mean, sometimes she would take my shirt off while we were kissing, but we always focused on her pleasure first and foremost. I stopped and looked at Charlotte for a moment. Sometimes I think that gets lost in a marriage. You stop trying to make each other feel like they're the best thing that's ever happened to you. It's one of those things that's so easy to do in a romance, but so hard to do in relationships that really matter, you know? To my surprise, she nodded and reached across the table to touch my hand for a moment. I understand what you mean, she said, looking at me intently. I always thought that my husband took me for granted and didn't make me feel special, but maybe... I think I stopped trying to make him feel special, too. She squeezed my hand but let go when the waiter came over and asked how we liked the food. We assured him that everything was fine, ordered another drink, and when they arrived, I continued the story. I'm not trying to seem like some kind of master of lovemaking, but with Patrice it was different than with my other partners. The look on Charlotte's face told me I had to clarify this quickly. I mean, when you're a young guy and you have sex for the first time, you're focused on the sensations. It's amazing, and of course you're young and have a lot of stamina, but overall you're just thinking about the sensations. When you get older, I continued, and you have a regular partner, you know what to expect, and you know that everything will be fine. Everything becomes a routine. This, then that, then that. She didn't seem to quite understand, and I had to work hard to clarify the situation. You see, when you're young and you're involved in something new, you're just blown away by new feelings and experiences. When you're older and you're involved in something, well, not new, but with a new person, you can concentrate on something else, and not just based on sensations. What I'm saying is that the experience of sex, the actual experience, doesn't vary that much from partner to partner, right? She still had a half-annoyed, half-perplexed look on her face, but she nodded slowly. The difference is in the partner. I continued. Who are you with? So, with Treachery, I could just enjoy the sensations, great sensations, not get overwhelmed and not get lost in them, but focus on her. I looked at her face, watching her drown in sensation. She looked at me and, I know it seems crazy, but she looked so grateful that I could stand it, and continued to make her feel this way. There was so much love in her eyes that I felt like a king. The sex seemed amazing to me. That's why you always asked for a room away from other guests, Charlotte said, matter-of-factly. Yes, Patrice was quite loud, and, she said she was never like that with her husband, only with me. It made me feel special. Charlotte nodded. I believe, she said. We ate in silence for a while. I was a little alarmed by her reaction to my story, and I believe she was processing it all. That's the story, Charlotte finally said, still holding her knife and fork over her food. I even got a little wound up. Nope, it's just wine, I replied. We both laughed, and the ice was broken a little. But seriously, it was incredibly sexy, she said, and paused for a moment. I'm sorry you didn't have such wonderful sex with your wife. No, it was, I assured her. To be honest, during our courtship and marriage, I had a lot more great sex with my wife than I did with Patrice. She was clearly happy to hear this, so I continued. It's just that when you're with someone new, there's nothing extraneous between you sexually. Just the two of you and the way you turn each other on and nothing else. No external stress, Oh, yes, I know, she said decisively, and I remembered that she also cheated on her ex. Anyway, she continued, you were together all day. You both called in sick from work. What else did you do? We usually relaxed. We talked. We hugged. We learned about each other's lives. We talked about our children. We ended up having sex again. We only met once every month and a half, so we just couldn't get enough of each other. And how long did all this take? Asked Charlotte. Well, by that time it was already approaching noon, I answered. Really? And what the hell did you do the rest of the day? We spent a little more time talking, just cuddling and relaxing, and then we had a snack, I shrugged. Sometimes we got dressed and went outside. Sometimes we ordered pizza to be delivered to our room, and a couple of times she brought lunch with her. One day, I said, remembering and smiling, we ordered pizza delivery, and Patrice opened the door, throwing on only my leather jacket, unbuttoned. It excited us so much. You're lucky you weren't caught, Charlotte said, frowning. Perhaps, I answered, shrugging. We were generally very careful, but it was so exciting that it was worth taking the risk. Did the hotel staff have any idea what you were doing? Oh, I'm sure we did. Sometimes we heard a couple of maids leaving our door, but I'm sure we weren't the only ones doing that. The hotel staff were used to it. We ate in silence for a while, almost finishing dinner when I reminded her that she still had her story to tell. I really didn't want to insist, but we agreed, and justice is justice. She nodded, taking the last bite of the baked potato and chewing it, then washed it down with the last of the wine. I know, she said. I'm working on it. Then she looked up at me and gave me a crooked half-smile. It's really difficult, isn't it? Yes, I agreed, finishing the last asparagus shoot on my plate. But it was your idea, and it really helps. You should try, I added, grinning to myself. At this point, as luck would have it, our waitress appeared to clear the plates. When she asked if we would like dessert, Charlotte ordered a glass of port and a large slice of chocolate cheesecake for both of us. When the waitress left, I looked at Charlotte and said, "Fourth glass? I'm already gone. We're going to get drunk." I need this to tell my story. This is the most humiliating thing I have ever done, she answered briefly. Then she quickly looked up and gave me a half-smile again. You know that I don't really like cheesecake, I said quite sincerely. It's more for me, she objected sharply, raising her chin. Once the drinks and dessert were served, she began her story. Well, you advertised and met a stranger with whom you cheated on your ex. I didn't. I knew the guy I cheated with for a long time. In fact, he was my very first boyfriend when I was 16. He deprived me of my virginity on prom night. Then, when we went to college, we broke up and went our separate ways. We lost touch for years. Then, one of the things you do when you start a new social media account is see who else is on it. Platform. I was looking for old friends from college and high school, sending occasional, "How are you?" messages when I accidentally came across Rob. In short, he answered, and before I knew it, we began to write messages to each other every week, then once every 3 or 4 days, and then every day. He was a fairly successful lawyer with his own firm in the state capital, married for the second time, with 3 children. His wife was an ER nurse. Once she started talking, it turned out that I didn't need to prompt her or ask for more details. She seemed in a hurry to tell everything herself. So, this correspondence lasted, several months. More than a year for sure. And gradually he became the person I trusted. Then I had not yet gone to a psychotherapist and did not want to let my sisters or close friends know what happened in my marriage. My husband and I became more like roommates than spouses. We took care of the children, but we no longer had sex. We argued about insignificant, in retrospect, little things, and in essence, we led separate lives. I don't know, but Rob seemed like a reliable person to trust. He lived 3 hours away, so I didn't have to worry about running into him. He was a guy, so maybe he could let me know what hubby was thinking. And we had known each other for a long time, so we had some kind of natural affinity. We didn't have to work to get to know each other better. So, little by little, I started telling him how disappointed I was in my marriage. And yes, I know, she said, raising her hands in front of her. I know. I should have talked to my husband about it, but for some reason it seemed easier to me. It turned out that there were problems in Rob's little paradise too. His wife was smart, beautiful, and really wanted to help people. But for some reason, she was a cold fish in the bedroom. They had sex anytime he wanted, but in the dark and always in a missionary way, absolutely nothing beyond the usual. After several years of this life, Rob became bored. So, after weeks and even months of confidential conversations with each other, we gradually began to compare sex with our spouses with the sex we had before. And of course, then we were young, full of energy, and as you said, when you discover something for the first time, it's just fucking cool in every way. I nodded. So you spent some time talking about how much better sex you had with each other than with your spouses, I said, making up for what she seemed reluctant to say. She looked at me with the saddest expression on her face, and after a few seconds, she simply nodded. When did you first meet in person? I asked. That year, there was a state teachers' convention in the capital, she said quietly. Oh, I said, nodding again. It made sense. When Rob found out that I would be in town, he suggested we meet for a drink. I agreed, and via SMS, we both agreed that everything should be platonic. This convention lasted 3 days. I had tickets to the awards ceremony with dinner on Friday night, and I went home on Saturday afternoon, after the awards dinner. That left Thursday. After checking into the hotel that morning, I spent the day going to all sorts of seminars. It was fun, I listened to great speakers, learned new techniques, and met with friends and colleagues. But I felt like my heart was beating faster the whole time. Day with anticipation that I will see Rob in the evening. Anyway, everyone ate their own dinner that night, and most people just went to the hotel restaurant or walked to some nearby establishment. The hotel was right in the city center, so there were no problems with places to eat. I felt like I was acting like some kind of secret agent, going outside and pretending to go get pizza, but then turning down a side street and meeting Rob in the parking lot around the corner. He had a beautiful silver Lexus with all the luxury bells and whistles, and when I sat in the passenger seat, I felt like I was in another world. It was like what you were talking about earlier. Sitting in his car while he drove, we went to a restaurant. I didn't have to worry about kids, or my husband, or fighting about money, or anything else. It was like a fairy tale. So, He took me to a restaurant by the lake, about an hour outside of town. I didn't even know where we were going. I was completely in his arms, and it was great. We chatted, caught up, and laughed. I asked him how he would explain his absence to his wife, and he said that he often had to stay late working on a case or meeting with clients and colleagues. She never even asked him about it. The dinner was amazing. There were drinks. We sat overlooking the lake and looked at the yachts sailing past. It was May, and it was warm outside all evening. It seemed that the summer holidays had already begun. I relaxed, as it seemed to me, for the first time in several months. It was so nice. So, we had a great dinner, we had a great time, and then he drove me back to the hotel. And the whole way I was honestly wondering if he expected me to invite him to my room or something. He knew that I had a roommate who was a math teacher from Easton, very nice, but not someone I would ask to leave the room for a while. And there were people at the conference that I knew who might know that Rob wasn't my husband. I definitely couldn't risk it. Wait a minute, I interrupted. You sound like you've already thought about sex with him. I thought it was still platonic at this stage. Oh, it was so, she assured me. But I think I already knew where it would ultimately lead. That is, since it was impossible at that moment, I allowed myself to fantasize about this topic. But at that moment, I still considered Rob just a friend. And our relationship is platonic. Anyway, he parked on a side street about a block from the hotel. We talked and talked for another half hour, but it was getting late, and he had to get home. He told me he would watch me from around the corner while I was safe from making it to the hotel lobby, even though there's almost no crime in the convention center area. So he did. I turned as I walked into the hotel and waved to him. I could still see him standing under the streetlight at the end of the block, and I thought that it was very cute, and that he looked so lonely. However, I told myself that it was not my problem and went up to my room. So that was all? I asked. Nothing happened? Not with him, at least not that night, she said insinuatingly, looking at me. At this point, drinks and dessert were served. I ordered water for us. After 3 strong drinks, excess fluid in the body was already becoming a problem for me, and I'm sure for her, too. We took a short break while I went to the toilet, and I cooled my face with cold water before returning to the table. By the time I returned, 2 large glasses of ice water had already been served. I gratefully drank half my glass while Charlotte went to the toilet. I watched her as she made her way across the hall and noticed that she was swaying slightly. Thank God we both had the foresight to take a taxi this evening. By the time we finish the port, we'll be drunk as hell. Returning to the table, Charlotte took a sip of port and took a bite of cheesecake. To please her, I also took a bite of dessert. I always thought that cheesecake had a sour aftertaste, and the thick texture didn't suit me either. But this dessert had very rich cocoa notes, so it was tolerable. Anyway, the whole next day at the conference, I felt like I was flying. You said that you felt like you had an amazing secret that no one knew about. It was the same with me. I just fluttered through all of these wonderful seminars, had dinner with old friends, laughed, and was happy. I had been texting Rob all day. He wanted me to skip the awards dinner that night and go out with him again. I told him he should spend Friday night with his wife and kids. He said no. His wife works the night shift in the ER. Didn't I tell you she's an ER nurse? Anyway, I told him that, especially since he needs to spend time with the kids. He ended up staying home with the kids. I went to an awards dinner and had a great time, and then hung out at the hotel bar with friends. I called home and talked to my husband and daughters. I thought that was the end of our relationship. It was over with Rob, and I was even glad. She stopped and looked at me. You know, I never wanted to cheat on my husband. In my life, I would never have thought that I would become a cheating wife. Then she took another bite of the cheesecake and chewed for so long that I had to ask her what happened to make things change. The next day, it was only half a day. Seminars in the morning, and then lunch to celebrate the end of the course. Rob called me and said that he had the afternoon free. He was supposed to be out of town at a meeting with colleagues and would like to see me before I left. This would have been our last chance to see each other. We lived 3 hours away from each other. Long story short, I agreed to meet him after lunch. And then I texted home that I would be hanging out with my friends for a while, so I would be home later than planned. He followed me around the corner into the same parking lot as last time. A cold front had passed through overnight, and it was cool and rainy. I threw my umbrella in the back seat, got into the car, and we drove off. We drove along the river, through the mountains. And because of the rain, it seemed that we were completely alone, only the two of us in the whole world. We talked about what our life could be like if we stayed together, and of course, we decided that it would be just amazing. He pulled up to some bar in a small town. I didn't even know where we were, but this place had dark wood, hidden booths, and a fire burning in a massive boulder fireplace to relieve the chill. I felt like he was really paying attention to me, like I was the most important thing in the world, like my husband was when we first started dating, but not anymore. I was only wearing jeans, a t-shirt, sneakers, and a windbreaker. My hair was wet and beaten down by the rain, but the way he looked at me made me feel like the sexiest woman in the world. He reached across the table and took my hand, and we sat drinking and holding hands in this little nook, reminiscing about the things we used to do in bed when we were teenagers. He even got up and danced with me when the jukebox started playing a familiar song. When it was time to go back, he walked me to the car, opened the door, and then kissed me there, under the umbrella, and the rain fell around us like a curtain that could shield us from the whole world. And I kissed him back. Damn it! For the first time in a long time, I felt wanted and needed. She looked at me, almost defiantly, and I believe she was waiting for a comment. However, this was her story. She had the right to tell me her truth. Who am I to interrupt her? All the while, she sipped port and nibbled on cheesecake between sentences. Her cheeks flushed. She started talking faster than usual, perhaps because she was nervous, but also, I think, because she wanted to finish her story quickly. On the way back, we were silent, holding hands, and when he dropped me off in the hotel parking lot, he leaned towards me, and we kissed again. Most of the other teachers had long since gone home, and at that moment I didn't care if he saw me, someone I know or not. Then he asked to meet again, and God, I didn't want this to be the last time I saw him. I asked how we could do this, and he advised us to come up with an excuse to leave the house from time to time on Saturday. He could always tell his wife that he had a golf game or a business meeting. We would meet somewhere for drinks or just dinner, spending time together. We didn't immediately move on to the idea of meeting at a hotel or something. I still assured myself that I wasn't actually cheating on my husband because we didn't have sex and we weren't going to have it. We were just two people who were intimate friends who talked, laughed, kissed, and made each other's lives bearable. I agreed. That evening, I returned home and was so excited that I practically attacked my husband. The girls were with friends, so we had the house to ourselves. He, as always, was busy with something on his computer, but I washed myself and came downstairs wearing one of his button-down shirts. Somehow, it always worked. He raised his head and couldn't understand what was happening to me. But I moved the computer away, climbed onto his lap, unbuttoned his shirt, and started kissing him. He finally understood what was happening, and soon after that, we were in the bedroom. I remember it like it was yesterday. I just imagined it was Rob having sex with me. God, it felt so good. And at the time, I justified all of this, just like you said. I will have a guy on the side, and I will be happy, and it will allow me to become a better mother and wife. Rob and I made a date in a couple of weeks on a Saturday. I told my husband I'd be spending the day shopping with my girlfriends. Rob and I met halfway, and it was another great little tavern he found. God, he knew there are 100 of them. Perhaps I should have asked why he knows so many of them. So we ate a nice meal, had a couple drinks, and then went back to his car, which was parked in the corner of the lot, and kissed for a long, long time. We were both going crazy, but at the same time we were in a public parking lot, although they were in a remote and protected place. He put his hand in my blouse. I made sure to wear a blouse that buttoned in the front like Patrice on your first date, and just feeling his hand on my chest made me go crazy. I knew we weren't. We can't just drive away without doing something more, and we certainly can't jump in the back seat and have sex. So I did for him what his wife had never done. I pleasured him below the belt. He went crazy. I wanted to prove to him that I was the best. She no longer checked my reaction to her revelations. I'm sure she was shocked by some of the things I said when I described my novel. Now she was going to do the same to me. And as hard as it was to hear some of these revelations, I completely understood her. By then, she had already eaten almost all of the cheesecake and had about a third left on the plate. I was still drinking my drink, but she switched to water when she finished her story. So, there's not much more to say. We started going on dates every third weekend on average. I ended up either pleasing him below the belt in the car, or sometimes, when we had more time, we'd rent a room and have sex. And this went on for months. I would tell my husband I was going shopping, or meeting friends for golf, or going out to dinner, and he never checked on me. When I was with Rob, I felt seen and valued, and we had great sex. Then I'd go home to my husband and wonder why I couldn't have that kind of relationship with him. When I had the affair, I said, nodding, everything was fine when I was with Patrice, but when we were apart, I felt terribly, just terribly guilty. It felt like I was being eaten away from the inside, that I don't know who I am anymore. How did you feel after dating? Well, like I said, for a long time I didn't think I was having an affair. I told myself it was just a close friendship, two old friends reminiscing about the good old days, etc. When we started having sex, I certainly couldn't fool myself into thinking that I wasn't cheating at that moment, and I did feel guilty, but mostly I justified it by telling myself that I wouldn't have done it if my husband hadn't ignored me, and Rob wouldn't do it if his wife weren't such a prude. So your spouses forced you to have an affair? I interrupted. She looked at me for a moment and honestly seemed like she was having a hard time concentrating. Or maybe me. We drank a hell of a lot. Yes, she said confidently. At least that's what we thought at the time. We weren't getting what we needed from our marriages. We both asked for what we needed, and we still weren't getting it. She paused for a minute, perhaps thinking about what she had just said. And yes, I know there were other ways to get what we needed. It was a betrayal. Yes, I should have been better. Me too, I said simply. There seemed to be nothing more to talk about, and as if by magic, the waitress appeared, cleared away the plates, and gave us the check. Charlotte paid for it with her credit card, and I gave her cash for my half. After returning the receipt with the credit card, the waitress thanked us for dinner and hoped we would come again. She also asked if we could have our car driven. I smiled at her. That was nice, but we've had quite a bit to drink and neither of us are driving today. We'll take an Uber. The waitress smiled, thanked us again, and left. I helped Charlotte put on her coat, threw on mine, and we walked out onto the sidewalk. We had already ordered our taxis by phone at the restaurant, so there was nothing we could do but wait. Well, how are we doing? She asked, turning to me with a wry smile. Great, I said, sighing. It was hard, but it was a great idea. We both hurt the people we loved the most, and we paid for it by being alone. Before we jumped into a new relationship, each of us should have known how we felt. The other and what he did. I turned around so that I was face to face with her. I think I know you much better now, and I hope you know me better too. She nodded slightly and then added, Definitely. But there's one last thing to admit. She waited for me to object, but I couldn't think of anything to say, so she continued. What was the worst thing you did during your affair, the thing that would hurt your wife the most? Are you serious? I couldn't believe she wanted to know even more. I mean, what the fuck? Why? She hesitated slightly and then said, Rip off the bandage. Bring everything into the light and take away the pain so we can begin to heal. I took a deep breath, but I didn't even have to think about it. Okay, I said, blushing. One day, when I had a free day, Patrice and I met up for a picnic and a walk in the park near our house. It was a warm spring day and quite hot. She was wearing a shirt without a bra, and since we were alone on the path, she unfastened it while we were walking. I was so excited. I was just walking and saw her breasts. I had to teach her a lesson. So, I turned and looked at Charlotte. I took her to my house. Charlotte shook her head as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. What? I nodded. Yes. Of course, we didn't have sex in the bed that I shared with my wife, but we did it on the floor of the room, on the carpet. It was quick and hectic. We were both afraid that the wife would, for some reason, come back from work. Then we got dressed and got out of there, giggling like children who had misbehaved. So, yes, that was the thing that would hurt my wife the most, I finished. Charlotte just stood there, stunned. Then she suddenly spoke without my prompting. Rob bought me gifts, mostly sexy lingerie, but sometimes jewelry. Once, perfume. Every time I went out somewhere with my husband, every single time, I wore what Rob gave me. On one occasion, on that level, I was so angry at my ex that I felt good about giving him that little fuck you without him knowing. I thought that was it. And yes, it was incredibly painful to think about, but then she spoke again. No, not that. She looked up at me. If we're going to do this, we have to do it right. There can't be any secrets left. When Rob sent that text message that my husband saw on my phone, the one that blew everything up and started this whole shit show that led to the divorce, I asked Rob if he was ready to leave his wife. The meaning of what was said slowly dawned on me. Holy shit. I definitely didn't expect this. I thought that I could only be happy with him and that I couldn't bear to lose him. I wasn't thinking clearly. I don't know what I would have done if he had said yes, but he didn't. To be honest, I was ready to leave my husband for him, although I couldn't bear the thought of causing such pain to our daughters. But he said no. He was already paying enough alimony to his first wife and said that if he divorced, he would go broke. I cried when he said it, and he was angry that I even asked. Well, she said, taking a deep breath, that's really all. This is the most hurtful thing I've ever done to my ex. I was literally stunned. I turned and walked away, but she didn't let me go. She followed, grabbing my hand until I turned and stared at her. And one last thing, she said almost despairingly. I couldn't believe there was more to come, and now I didn't know if it was even a good idea. I didn't tell you about the best thing my ex ever did. She looked at me, clearly needing me to listen to her for a few more moments, so I put my hands in my pockets and stood looking at her. When he found that message from Rob and realized that I had been cheating on him for a long time, he didn't act disdainfully. Instead, he admitted that he, too, had an affair many years ago when our daughters were little. He could have protested, but instead he stooped to my level. As it turned out, we were both in too much pain to stay together. I couldn't believe he was having an affair, and he couldn't believe I was having an affair either. It just didn't work. We had to go to different sides, at least for a while, but what he did means a lot to me now. There was silence, and we silently and slowly walked back to the entrance to the restaurant. I think we were both disgusting, I said finally. Uh-huh, she agreed, still looking at me. But that was then, and we are here now. Yes, I said slowly, thinking about what I had said. That's right. The past is the past. Well then, what do you think? Will there be another date? She asked. I know there was a pause and it seemed long, but eventually I nodded. Yes, I said. I would really like that. She smiled at me and her face lit up and became even more beautiful than before. Okay, she said, because I would like that too. Then I leaned over, she raised her head and we kissed. It was a deep, long kiss. Her taxi came first and we kissed one more time, quickly, before she slipped inside and disappeared. Mine arrived in a few minutes and took me home to my small apartment. I barely had time to take off my coat when I received a message from my youngest daughter. Well, how did it go? She wrote. Are you and Mom going to get back together? Who knows? I wrote in response. But we at least want to try. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.